Okay, so this is video 2 in my game dev process. What I'm gonna do right here is set up an effects folder for special effects. It's probably a little bit too soon to start trying to mess with this, and I didn't really plan on working on lighting and sounds and special effects until later on, after I've already applied my materials and pulled in my set dressing and that kind of stuff. But I had this idea that there would be kind of floating glittery particles. Again, this game is going to be set to kind of like a nighttime situation. So I saw some YouTube videos and I thought I wanted to pull this in now just to kind of test it out and see how I like it. This was pretty easy if you're using it at the most basic level. I'm sure there's all kinds of added layers of complications and special things that you could do with it. But at the most basic level, what I was looking for, this was pretty simple to set up and pretty easy to work with. So right there, what I did within my special effects folder is create a new Niagra system, and I'm just calling it fx underscore, I think I called it like sparkles or something like that. And so you're gonna right click and select add emitter, and I'm looking for the hanging particulates emitter. Each of these emitters basically provide you with different special effects, but like I said, I want something that's kind of hanging in the air and glittery to add to my kind of firefly nighttime ambiance. So once you do that, it brings up this node here and it gives you some options with your particulate emitter. So you can change the density of it, you can change the color of the sparkles, you can change the extents in terms of length, width, and height of the particulate kind of box, if you will, once you drop it in. So you can kind of just play around with those. I think that's what I did, is I just kind of dropped it in so I can get it placed in the model, and you can see me doing that right there. It kind of comes in as a big box essentially, so just imagine that box is the extent of how much of the level that those particulates exist in, and then again, you can change the density of it. So there's just some various settings here you have to kind of play with. Again, this is my first time working with the Niagra system, so I didn't really know a whole lot about it. I'd like to go back and learn more, but for a first time, it did what I needed it to do. I dropped it in. It was pretty simple to set up, and I changed kind of the overall extents. That's what I'm doing right here. You can see the box size, and it just means that it's going to cover a lot more area of my overall level. And of course, if you wanted this to just be in a select portion of the level, you would make that extents box a lot smaller. Now I'm changing the density of it, I believe. Yeah, so right there I'm kind of just testing it and seeing if I like that density or not. And then you can change the color of it. I think right now what I did was I set it up to kind of be like a glowy red color, but honestly, that's probably not right. I think I was actually talking to my sister about it, and she was like, well, I think like fireflies tend to have more of like a greenish glow, so I need to go back and change the glow color. I stopped working on it for a little bit so I could edit these videos, but I'm realizing that now as I go back and review all this and add my voiceover to it. So yeah, there's a ton of settings in there, and as I get more experience working with Niagra, I'm sure I'll go back and add some additional stuff. I need to do some more research, but something that I mentioned in my first video was I'm not going to be super concerned with perfection and getting every single thing exactly correct right now, because I don't want that to bog down my overall build process. I think for me, the important thing is to get the game done and accomplish what I set out to do. And I think if I get way too bogged down trying to perfect every single tool, I think I'm going to really slow myself down and kind of lose some momentum. So my idea with this is to start big. So pull in components, get my placeholders in there, get my set dressings, my landscape materials, then work on lighting and sound, then work on special effects, do some beta tests, some beta runs on it, go back, maybe adjust some of the set dressings and components, tweak the Niagra systems and that kind of stuff, and kind of just make it more of an iterative process rather than trying to get everything perfect right off the bat. Because again, I am a first-time game dev, so I kind of realize, I'm not going to get all of this on the first try, and I'm okay with that. So right now, I'm kind of looking at everything that I bring in terms of the set dressings and FX and all of that as kind of a placeholder to kind of set the stage and get the vibe and the flow and the look of the level, and then I'll go back and fine tune everything later. So as I'm looking at the Niagara system right there, it's a little bit too small and too concentrated. It's kind of looking like a swarm of flies, which is not the look that I'm going for. So I'll go back later and change the extent of that so that it covers a much wider area of my level and it's less dense. But for now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to change the material, the default material that comes with this Niagara particle. So right there is the material that I'm kind of hovering over on the right. I'm going to do a search, a folder search for where that material is saved. So I'm pulling up my content browser right now. I'm going to go back to that window, and you just click that little folder with the little magnifying glass. And I'm going to look for that material, which is the default, and I'm going to drag and drop it into my FX folder that I created earlier. And I'm going to say copy here. This is because I don't want to edit that original material in case it's being used by anything else in the Unreal Engine system. So I'm just copying it, and then I'm going to edit this one and apply this to my Niagara system. And this is because I want to make these particles a little bit more bright and glowy and kind of adjust the way that they are glowing. So in my material graph for that duplicated material that I made, I named it M Sparkles, and I'm going to add a multiply node to my lerp, and I'm going to reconnect that to my emissive color. And you're going to see here what that's going to do. It's going to make that way brighter. So you can see that there on the left. And then if I save and I go back into my Niagara system graph, you'll see how much brighter those particles are. And we'll see that here in a second. So I'm going to open that graph back up. I'm going to make sure that I have my new material applied. You can just do a search for it by name. There it is, M Sparkles. And you can see how much more those glow. So I think that's going to be a really cool effect with a nighttime sky and low lighting. And it's going to give the whole level kind of a very ethereal, kind of glittery, glowy effect, which is exactly what I'm going for. So now that I've applied those changes, I'm going to change the extent of my overall Niagra system in my level, because it's a little bit too concentrated and it's looking like a swarm of flies, like I mentioned. And so now you can see how much less dense it is when you change the extents. If you still want to be super dense, you have to up the density once you up the extents of it. And you can see here, I made it a little bit too tall and too narrow, so it's kind of doing this weird vertical shape. So I'm gonna have to go back and change my dimensions on my X, Y, Z. And that's what I'm doing here. I'm just kind of trying to adjust it to see what I like the best. That one kind of didn't work out, so I think I'm gonna adjust it again. There we go. So I kind of want it hanging a little bit lower to the ground visually, as so that the player can kind of walk through the Niagra system, so it's not above you or kind of off in the distance. I want to be able to walk among those sparkling particles. That's my center base point that I'm moving around. So obviously the Niagra system extent is going to be based on wherever that base point is. So I'm kind of trying to move it more toward the center of my level, and then that way my XYZ dimensions are all kind of equally around that center point, if that makes sense. So now you can kind of see the way those glitters and sparkles look among the trees. There's going to be a lot more trees here eventually. There's going to be a lot more density because I do want this to be a little forest in the level. So again, it's probably too soon to be pulling in Niagra FX at this point in time, since I'm still very early kind of in the prototype initial set dressing kind of process. But I just had the idea. I wanted to drop it in and see how it was working, see if it even made sense, and it does. It's doing exactly what I had imagined. So I'm gonna stop with the Niagra system here in a minute and then go back to filling out the level and set dressing. So right now what I'm doing is looking through my content and pulling in some different trees. As I mentioned before, the trees that I placed initially were kind of just a placeholder. I figured at some point I would either replace them or add in a bunch of other different trees. Something that you'll notice is it really depends on which content packs that you're pulling in. If you look at these trees that I just dropped in right there, they actually have a movement. So they kind of sway, and it kind of gives the feeling that there is some weather. There's a breeze, a light breeze going through the level, which I really like. It kind of it gives everything kind of an added layer of realism. And this particular pack had 3 different trees, and it's really nice because that tree also moves, and so does this one as well. So if you look at the other trees kind of in the back that I had previously placed, those don't have any movement at all. So one thing that I would say is kind of consider what look you're going for. If you're going to go for more of a cartoony build, less realism, those stagnant trees, stationary trees, are probably just fine. I'm kind of going for a little bit more of like a realism, ASMR, ethereal, environmental kind of a look with mine. So I really think that the swaying trees adds a lot to the overall ambiance. So you can imagine once I have my nighttime sky set up and I've got these twinkling little glitters all in the air, kind of representing fireflies and bugs. And then I'm going to add in my sounds, my nighttime sounds like crickets and that kind of stuff. It's going to feel a little bit more realistic, and that's kind of the look that I'm going for. So now I'm kind of just duplicating those trees all over through my forest and populating my forest. I'll probably still come back in with some additional different trees to really give it a mixed look, and that helps with the realism of it. If you use the same tree over and over and over and over again, it's going to kind of take away from it. But the more different types of foliage and trees and meshes and stuff that you have in here, the more realistic it's going to look. So here I'm kind of floating around and looking at my different trees. You'll see some of the trees are crooked, and I'm totally okay with that because in nature, not every single tree is growing perfectly straight up and down. I like that some of them are kind of leaning. That one was leaning a little bit too much, so I just wanted to straighten it out. And here I'm kind of scoping out an area in my level where the player can walk up this kind of magical winding staircase up into the tree line. I'm not sure what material these steps would be. For now, I'm just using kind of a basic cube shape to lay that out. I don't want this to be stairs. I want it to be a little bit more of a magical thing. I don't know if they're going to be slightly invisible or translucent, if they'll look like clouds. I'm sure I could probably apply like a cloud material to it. I don't know yet. I'm not sure what these are going to look like yet. Or if I just want it to look like an actual tree house and build a tree house component up in the trees. I'm not sure yet, but right now what I'm doing is I'm kind of laying out those cubes and testing my jump height to make sure that that's, first of all, reachable by the player, and it is, and that the platform is the correct size. It's a little bit too big, and I figured I could go a little bit taller with it, or a little bit higher with it, sorry. And so now you're going to see me kind of just laying that out in a spiral shape as it goes up into the trees. As I'm working on this build, and as I mentioned before in the first video, every so often after I've built something, I stop and play it. It's interesting here, you're going to see me fall off this platform here in a second. That's because I'm like entirely a console gamer. I'm not a keyboard and mouse player, so that's kind of interesting working on this game build as I stop and have to test my level out every so often is learning a new way of gaming. That's like a no-brainer. That's like not a big deal at all if you are a PC player that or PC gamer. That's like not even something you would even think about. But for me, as somebody that always plays on controller, there's an added level of something different there that I have to learn as I play my level. So now I'm kind of going over to my cave area. You'll notice off to the right in my items, I'm going through some of the grayed out items and pinning them. For whatever reason, and I'm not sure why, I still haven't figured out why, but not all of your items will load in with your level every single time. And when they're grayed out like that, I couldn't figure out why after I was placing a lot of components, every time I would open my game, they wouldn't be showing. So I finally realized you have to pin them for them to kind of reload into your level. These are my collectibles. These are kind of like a test run of like the firefly. I want to add some movement so that they kind of like bounce in the air. And they're a little bit too big. I need to make them smaller and change the color and that kind of stuff. But what I found out was you have to go through and pin them in place. And I thought that once I did that every single time my level opened after that point, they would be loaded in, but that was not the case. And so you'll see later on, I figure out how to make all of those components and items load in with my level. Again, you'll see that a little bit later on in the build, because it was really starting to frustrate me every single time I would save and close my game and then reopen it to work on it, and all of this stuff was unloaded again. And here I'm going to go through and clean up duplicates. As you can see there, I had like a duplicate layer of railing, and that was because I had loaded in the railing, didn't realize I needed to pin it for it to show up, and then I added in additional railing, and so I was adding in components over components. So again, part of the learning process. Here I'm test running through my water. It's getting a little bit too deep in certain spots. I don't want my player to be drowning. I just want it to be kind of like waist high water. So I'm going to go through and adjust my landscape in this area. So I'm going to stop on the cave. I'm kind of bouncing around right now, but you know, I'm still early on in the design process, so I'm kind of testing different bits and bobs of the level. But I think overall what I'm going to really start focusing on with the build in terms of detail and set dressings and placing items and stuff is going to be this village area that's kind of tucked under this rocky overhang. So I'm going to move back into the town. I'm going to adjust some of these blocks. These are, again, placeholders for homes. I don't know if I'm going to build these or just download some pre-made houses. I'll probably build them, but I'm just not going to focus on that just yet. I want to get the background of the cliffs and stuff built in first. So right here, what you're going to see me start working on is going to the Quixel Bridge and start pulling in some boulders and cliff sides and rocks from the marketplace. Or I guess not the marketplace, sorry, the Quixel Bridge. The nice part about working with Unreal Engine 5 is they have a really vast library of assets that you can use, which is really, really nice. And again, for me, since this is a beginner game, I'm focusing on the build and actually just getting the game done. If you're much more advanced and you've been doing this for a very long time, you're going to take it to the next level and you're going to actually make your own rocks and your own materials and your own trees and that kind of stuff. I am nowhere near that, and I probably don't ever really, to be honest with you, need to be near that. I'm not that interested in making components. I mean, there's so many different things that you could focus on as a game developer. You could focus on the user interface, making materials, making components, the mechanics of your mannequin and your player and that kind of stuff. So there's like so many different things that you could focus on, and those are not really things that I'm necessarily interested in. I mentioned in the first video, what I'm really interested in is actually just the landscape and the setting up the ambiance and the build of the level is really where I'm interested, where somebody else might be completely just interested in making custom blueprints for your mannequin movement or characters or that character development and that kind of stuff. So anyway, what you're seeing me do right now is search through the Quixel Bridge. I did a few different searches, so you can do rock, you can do boulder, you can do cliff, and it'll give you different results. I want this to kind of look green and mossy with like danglies, growies, trees, ivies, that kind of stuff. So I'm probably going to go for the mossy looking type of rocks and stuff. So what I'm doing is anything that I like, I'm going to drag and drop it into my level. You can also click the little add in the blue circle there with the plus in the bottom right hand corner. First you have to download the component, and you can see that loading there, and then once it's downloaded, you see that little check mark. You can either click the add button or drag and drop it into your level. So I usually just do drag and drop. I think it's the easiest, and I kind of put them all in the same little area, and then from there I can kind of pull from them and start arranging them in a way and scaling them up and down. The nice thing about a lot of these is they scale up really well. So for most of them that I've found, you don't really lose any quality when you go up with them. And I do scale these up a considerable size, and you'll see that as I start to work on this cliff side here and this cave area. So that's really nice. So that now that I've got a good variety of rocks and boulders pulled in, I'm going to start arranging them. So you can see here as I scale up, it really still looks really good. The material doesn't get like super weird or stretched out, which is really nice about these components. And so I'm going to start placing it. You can see where I stretched the landscape up before. That was just a placeholder for a cliff edge or rocky edge, if you will. So now that I'm getting this into place, I can go back and flatten out that landscape that I extruded up. And you can just do erase. You could also click flatten and when you click flatten, it's going to base it off of whatever your base starting point is. So you want to start it off the flat part of the ground, and then it's going to flatten everything else to match that elevation. If you're clicking on the top of the cliff and then click flatten, it's going to flatten everything up to that same height. So you kind of have to set your base point first. So I just go with erase, and it kind of just flattens it out. That's the easiest way to do it. So now I'm going to kind of start to rotate these rocky outcroppings and stuff into place. You can see here that I'm sticking out past the edge of my level extents. Your player is only going to really, this is going to be the boundary of my level on this part, and there's not going to be any point in the game where my player can see out past the boundaries of this level. So you'll see as I'm kind of working on this, the backside of this cliff is completely open. That mesh, there's no back to it. So it's not very pretty to look at from the opposite side, and you'll see that in a while, but it doesn't really matter because my player is never really going to see it from that angle. And again, on top of it, this is going to be at nighttime, and so I'm not super concerned with it. The other thing is you'll notice I kind of hang it out past the edge of my level extents, like I was saying before. And again, I'm not concerned with it because it doesn't matter. There's nothing else back there, and my players can never walk past that point anyway. So hopefully that makes sense. What I'm saying is you don't have to place these meshes directly over the extents of the landscape. They can kind of hang out over the edge on the backside. And you can see here what I'm talking about. That underside of that mesh, some of these meshes are not four-sided. Some of them just have kind of a front and a side and a top, and maybe the back or the bottom is open. You can still work with them. In this case, I'm kind of rotating it upside down so that it becomes kind of the top of the cave or this like rocky outcropping. And again, it doesn't matter that that underside is now facing up and that it's open, because you're never going to be up there and you're never going to see it. And I'm not going to have the camera fly around to where you would see it. So you can see there, it's not very pretty to look at, but at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter. So the next maybe 10 minutes or so of this video is just going to be me kind of setting up this rocky outcropping cave area and just arranging these various boulders and rocks in different ways and kind of stacking them and overlapping them. The nice thing about a lot of these Quixel Bridge items and components and meshes and stuff is that they overlap with each other really well, and it doesn't look that weird. So I'm just kind of overlapping things, layering things, stacking things, and trying to get it to how I want it to look. And so that's kind of what the next 10 minutes or so is just going to focus on. And I'll just play some background music, and then I'll kind of interject in a while. So as I mentioned in the first video, I was trying to set up collision boxes around some of these boulders because they don't come with them already set up. And I had a simple collision set up in the first video over a boulder, but it creates some weird instances where your player's kind of hovering in the air and stuff, so it's not ideal. And then I mentioned in that first video that I do figure it out later. This is kind of where I figure it out. There is a way to make the actual mesh of the object be the collision, and that's what we want. So essentially what we're saying when we say collision is the surface that will interact with your player. And in this case, you can see here, I've figured out how to make the actual mesh geometry the collision, and then so you might find that after you set up your complex collision mesh on your object, your player might still be walking through it and you might not know how to fix that. I realized you have to set up a customized collision setting there, and then it should work. So we're going to test it now, and my player should not be able to walk through it anymore. And that worked. And the nice thing is your player can get right up close to those surfaces or walk on top of those surfaces without it being weird, where if you had used like a generic collision capsule shape or round shape or box shape, your player would have stopped a lot further out from the surface, and it kind of creates for a strange interaction with that object. So
Feels so good. Feels so good. Feels so
So now I'm gonna bring in some of my quote-unquote danglies. So basically I'm just talking about like hanging plants, ivies, that kind of stuff. So I'm using the Mega Scans. I think these are the broom creepers, and they've got a good variety in there. There's like what, 1, 2, 3, like 10 or 15 of them. I like these a lot because they have a number of different configurations, but also they have the same kind of movement that those other trees that I brought in do. They kind of sway in the wind, and I really like that. So I'm gonna start to place these on that rocky overhang or outcropping above. And I just want this whole scene to look kind of like this overgrown, kind of cliff, semi-cave area. So I'm going to start to add these around the rock edges, like they're kind of growing in the cracks and stuff. And then I'm going to start to add trees and some other vegetation up on top of these boulders here. So we can kind of watch me doing that here. This will take a few minutes in the video, and I figured I'd take a sidetrack here and talk about my setup just in case anybody is curious. As I mentioned in the previous video, I am working on a new PC. I built my PC about a month ago, and I do have a video on YouTube. You can check that out if you're interested. In terms of the rest of my setup, I've got two 32-inch monitors, one horizontal, which is my main screen, and then one off to the left that's vertical, and I kind of keep my GPU, CPU, memory, performance manager up, as well as a browser on the internet when I need to look up stuff on how to do something or download some music and sound effects and that kind of stuff. By the way, I do use Pixabay. Those are free to use, and they have GIFs, they have music, they have sound effects, images, that kind of stuff. I don't think you're required to credit them when you use their stuff, but I always do anyway. So if you go back and look at some of my Elden Ring gameplays or like, I don't know, my PC builds, I usually include those credits in the description of the video. And that's also where I'm going to be using some of the sound effects that I use in the game. Like, for example, like frogs and crickets, nighttime sounds, that kind of stuff. They have a pretty big selection on there, and I use them. Let's see, what else? In terms of my keyboard, I have a Rocat Magma keyboard, and then I have Logitech Hero gaming mouse. My microphone is the HyperX Duocast USB. I also use it for gaming sometimes. It works with PlayStation 5. And then I just have an extra large gaming mousepad. The main thing that I'm missing from my setup is a vlogging style camera. I'm not sure what I would get yet. I don't want to spend a ton of money on one. Probably just a smaller one that's for PC. So I think that'll be one of the last things I add to my setup, because at some point I'll either maybe live stream my build or include a video of myself as I do voiceovers on these videos.
Feels so good. Feels so
So I figured I'd bring this up now. This is kind of off topic, but related. Recently, they just announced that they're going to be transferring Marketplace, Quixel Bridge, and a few others to the new platform or interface, I guess, if you will, and it's going to be called Fab. So, what that means for us indie game devs, and if you're just doing this as a hobby, is that currently one of the main benefits of using Unreal Engine 5 and having access to the Quixel Bridge and the marketplace and all of that stuff is the amount of content that is free to use. And what I mean is all of these boulders, all of these assets and things that I'm bringing into my project, for the most part, have been free. I did purchase Brushify, I did purchase Ultra Dynamic Sky, and I'll probably purchase a few others. But for the most part, all of this stuff is free, and that makes it kind of highly beneficial to use Unreal Engine 5 over another platform. With the transfer to Fab, I believe at the beginning of 2025, now everything that you use, every boulder, every tree, every component will now have to be paid for. So I just figured I'd bring this up now in case you haven't heard this and you happen to be watching this and maybe you're interested in maybe getting started with Unreal Engine 5, or you're like me and you're already in it and maybe you take weeks off or months off at a time because you're just too busy to use it. I would highly suggest getting as soon as Fab launches, and I believe it's going to be mid-October. I think what we have to do is we have to make a Fab account, and they're going to make all of the content that is currently free. Once it transfers over to Fab, it will still be free until the end of 2024. So that gives us a little more than 2 months. So what I would suggest is if you happen to be watching this, even if you're not in Unreal Engine 5 right now, or you don't have time to get in it for the next few weeks or next couple months, at least get onto Fab and quote unquote purchase or add all of the free content to your account so that way you can have it for your use indefinitely. I believe that's what they said, is as long as you add that content to your account, once it goes to a paid service at the beginning of 2025, if you've already added those things and they show up as that you have quote unquote purchased them, even though they're $0 right now, you will be able to use them indefinitely. So I think that's kind of like a little bone that they're throwing to those of us who are already using this content and using Unreal Engine 5, is they're giving us a chance, a short window to be able to still use the content and have access to it for free. Again, it's kind of a bummer, but if you really think about it, I mean, I wasn't that happy when I heard about it, but Unreal Engine 5, Quixel Bridge, Marketplace, they've really given us a ton of amazing stuff to work with for free for many years. So it makes sense at some point in time that this would turn into some kind of paid service. I hope that Unreal Engine 5 continues to be free to use as a software, especially for indie game developers. I understand if you're kind of like a AAA game studio or something, of course it makes sense that you would have to have a paid, subscription or pay for seats. But if you're not making any money off of it, or you're just starting out like me, I think it's fair to make it free. And I hope it continues to be that way. And so, yeah, I figured I'd just kind of throw this in here since that was just announced at the time that I was editing this video, just in case you haven't heard. Again, I'll try to make this more clear. Currently in Unreal Engine 5, you can go to Quixel Bridge, type in boulder, you can pull in all the boulders and plants and trees and things that you want for free. Same thing with Marketplace, you can download megascans and stuff and add them to your library for free. At the beginning of 2025, that will no longer be the case, and it will be paid. So again, I think, as far as I understand it correctly, once Fab launches in the middle of October, it doesn't give a specific date, but I'm assuming that's going to be within the next week or so, you will have until the end of 2024, which is about 2 months, to create an account and add all of these assets to your library so that it shows up on your account moving into 2025 and you don't have to pay for them. Hopefully that makes sense, but there are tons of other videos where they explain this a lot better. And if you hadn't heard, I would suggest go watching those and make sure you're prepared for that transition. So I think we're nearing the end of this build video. The next build video, which will be part 3, will just pick up where I'm leaving off right here in terms of just building out this kind of cave and village area. I'm not sure what else I'll be doing in the next video. Possibly pulling in my ultra dynamic sky. I wasn't going to do that until later, but I kind of want to start to see how this looks at night. So I might do that in the next video. But anyway, if you watch this, thanks again, and stay tuned for part 3.